Good afternoon, my name is Liliana Lopez, and this is my final project for Didactics 1 with Angela Risa. I proposed a project that's called Let's Go on a Road Trip. The driving question, what is the most effective way of traveling through Colombian territory? Taking into account that project-based learning has a lot to do with a sense of community, as well as cognition and communicative abilities. I thought that it would be good to have the whole focus of the project for it to be within Colombian territory, even if it is in English. The grade level of the subject, they're young adults mostly, at A2 level. The idea is for this to be for beginners, but a false beginner, as they call it, because they have some prior knowledge of the language, and at a certain point, what they really want to do is just practice. So I had that in mind. The time frame is for 6 weeks, taking into account that most students go to class twice a week. This is a project that's based on the idea that to plan a road trip or to go on a road trip, there are 6 phases, thus the 6 weeks and the 6 milestones. The first one is selecting a destination. The second one is choosing a route. The third one is considering the vehicle, preparation, planning for stops, and bringing entertainment, which is really, really important. The standard is the common European framework of reference for foreign languages, and the rubric is one that I created right here. The evaluation standards are the understanding the importance of planning an itinerary and preparation prior to a trip. That is a social competence, you can say. Acquires vocabulary to develop activities proposed. There's the vocabulary part, and there's the grammar structures and the uses of the grammar structures. And lastly is achieving meaningful communication and interaction with their peers. So it's community, and it's also communicative. The developing standard and advanced criterion, as logic would have it, has to do with being under the standard or over the standard. For time purposes, I will only read the standard. It creates an itinerary for the first part, for the first criteria. To being at standard, it creating an itinerary of desired trip. It includes all the stops and vital information necessary for their journey, researches and includes some elements needed to survive, and documents them accordingly. It's worth noting that the actual project is creating an itinerary that would be the final product of what their dream or ideal road trip through Colombia would be. So at the beginning or throughout the course or throughout the project, the students would select a place, investigate and write the itinerary, and make some sort of brochure, if you will. The vocabulary, it's acquiring and applying the vocabulary provided in class. For grammar, the grammar structures learned in class with some mistakes. Worth noting that here we're not really doing a lot of emphasis on grammar, though it is included. And achieving meaningful interaction would be participates in group discussions, expresses their intentions, and offers feedback when required. Okay, so we have the milestones. As I mentioned before, there are 6 milestones for the 6 steps of planning a road trip. The first one is selecting a destination. Second one is choosing a route. Third one is considering the vehicle, the preparation, planning for stops, which is the 5th, and the 6th is bringing entertainment and reviewing the itinerary, which would be the final product, right? The key question for the first one is, are you fond of any particular trip you've had, so as to get the juices flowing of what this would be. The second one, do you like to take the interstate, or are you more of a back road kind of person, thinking about the different routes you can take? We will see the assessment later on. What possible setbacks can you encounter while on the road is considering the vehicle, the importance of preparation, which will also lead to further activities down the line, which is the next one, which is milestone 4, preparation. How long does it take to pack a bag? Is there anything you can't travel without? And then planning for stops, thinking about the itinerary in of itself. And lastly, what can you do to avoid being bored during those long hours of travel, which would be the final product of something to sugarcoat it all with. There are 12 lessons planned. I will include that in the document I will send. But basically the first week with the first milestone of choosing a destination, there are activities involving urban areas and rural areas. For the second week, which is choosing a route, we'll talk about means of transportation and using a GPS or using a map, using technology to be able to plan our route. For the third milestone, which is considering the vehicle, we'll talk about weather conditions, terminal traffic, engine failure, and asking for help, which would be day 2. The fourth one, would be making a checklist for weather appropriate clothing, documents, all that sort of thing, as well as peer reviewing the checklist back in the community criteria of the whole project. And lastly, planning for stops. We'll talk about booking hotels, hostels, vacation houses, everything in between. Tours and famous landmarks, and the 6th week I left for games and just the presentations itinerary. Obviously this is a lot and we were asked to only make 1 lesson, so I made 5. The first lesson, it corresponds to lesson number 1. It's just an introduction to the class and have a baseline reference of where the whole class is at, where the level is, and to know how much you can demand from your students, because obviously we're not going to demand more than what they can give, right? We will talk about city landmarks to a listening activity from ESL Lab. We will need the lab, and for that I created a little workshop, which is right here. Right here. So this is a mind map. Students will look at it. First of all, they will look at it. They will draw out the meanings of the words to make associations. And as we can see here, the lesson plan as a whole is very task-based. There's a pre-task, a task stage, which includes controlled practice and free practice, and then there's the post-task that requires feedback. So when you present the topic here, the teacher opens with the question, what cities in the country are worth traveling to, following up with what places are worth visiting while there. The teacher writes ideas mentioned on the board. The practice includes the general listening activity that I had mentioned before in ESL Lab. As a class, everyone tries to answer the questionnaire on the page. And then the students will have a round of questions regarding that. And just for the production, which would include this, they would have already had this from the beginning. They will go to a page which is in the township or town hall of Medellin's website, where they have all of the points of references and landmarks. So the idea would be to associate everything on the mind map onto that map that you have online. And lastly, we would start thinking about what other cities we would like to go to. For grammar, there's the prepositions of place, time, as well as vocabulary, which is just very basic vocabulary on the rubric. City, transport, building, and place. The next one that I thought worth mentioning was the second class, which is talking about rural areas. They're just defining differences between each particular region and different kinds of roads. There are diametrical differences between urban and rural areas. And by this point, we'll be thinking more about the destination. for this project. The material I used, and it's very grammar based, but as well as comprehensive. There's a resource which is by John Saslow, Top Notch 1, which is a very interesting book. The way it works is it's a very comprehensive approach where there's scaffolds, meaning that you make it easy at the beginning so that they be able to make it, so they'll be able to progress little by little. However, since the project has to be created by the teacher, I only mention it, but I do think that it's worth noting. Here the procedure would be to play the video at first, ask the students to write down as many adjectives as they hear in the video as possible. Repeat the video again if necessary. Ask them if they have ever been in a similar situation than the one on the video. That is a pre-task. Controlled practice and the free practice would include, with the whole class, go to the first part of this worksheet, which is also taken from the book Top Notch 1, and do the activity pertaining to the grammar structure, which is here. In the free practice, in groups, the students will answer the questions that are on the worksheet. Remember a time you went outside of the rural area? What do you say was amazing, incredible, talking about the vocabulary that was mentioned previously in the video, and so on and so forth. Again, all of this will be in your inbox. And teacher points out mistakes, the feedback, the teacher makes note of the most relevant places in discussion and adds them on the board. All of these classes are designed to last 40 minutes, which is like an average class, considering that people are late and everything. Here's the vocabulary. Also, lastly, what I want to mention is this video. You will see an extended version of the project plan in the email I'm going to send. However, this last one that I wanted to mention was a communicative approach where we do role play. So considering that at some point they might be on the road, they might need to ask for help, they might need to give someone else advice. To offer advice, we'll use the grammar structure should, right? And we'll gain more confidence when speaking, which is also one of the main objectives of this plan. And this will also help us with the preparation part of our project. This includes. So I thought to start it out, considering the whole communicative approach, making it more amicable. I'll start with By a Horse with No Name by America, and tell a story to introduce the topic about a time that the teacher was somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and someone helped. Emphasize the part that the person used should, so that they could use it in turn for their own practice, and ask the students what they could have done, what the teacher could have done differently. Then in the task portion, the students will divide in teams depending on their main means of transportation. If somebody wants to travel via bus on the road trip, if someone wants to travel by car, if someone wants to fly, do it differently just for pragmatic purposes. And I just imagine like what could go wrong in each situation. And then they will take turns providing advice for every situation proposed. Then they will go in front of the class, act out these scenarios that they themselves have created, and then in the post-production, there will be a reflection about how important it is to prepare and how they will include it in the project. There's a lot of vocabulary here that will be used. So just step back, delay. All of these are included in the rubric. Roadside assistance is very important. And this is something that I had mentioned previously, which is the map activity, which also has another worksheet. This is a basic worksheet to know how to handle directions. Basically, everybody will, in some, again, it'll be on the final product. They will use this to learn the imperative, which is giving orders, and which is the way you give directions, right? As well as the adverbial and the adjectival phrases that you use: turn right, turn left, and so forth. And lastly, something else that I thought was pertinent, considering that one of the main focuses of these projects is cognition. We've done this before with the mental maps, the association. We've already done grammar translation. However, something that's very important is classifying. So, in one of the last lessons that I proposed is making a checklist of everything you're going to need. So this checklist is here, which is a 4-page checklist. It's a very long checklist. It includes all kinds of luggage, clothing, toiletry, health, technology, documents, security, organizing, home preparation, things you need to do before you go out on a trip. It's a very long list, and for this reason, and considering time limitations, I dedicated 30 minutes, 20 minutes to this activity rather than 10, which is usually what it takes to do a task. All the references are there. They'll need a bilingual dictionary. We'd probably just start by how we reflected previously, how important it is to be prepared so they're ready for this. Brainstorm what you need for a long trip. Mention the 7 categories I previously mentioned, and introduce the idea of essentials and non-essentials, because it's a long list, but not everything is necessary. So we'll probably do that. And then during the practice, we'll do a total physical approach where instead of just naming the things, I'll act them out, the teacher acts them out, or whoever knows what it is, they'll act them out, and everybody will just proceed to classify them accordingly with the categories previously mentioned. And in the end, they'll decide if it's useful or not. And that's basically it. There's a lot of vocabulary here added as well. And that is just a sample of what the project is. I'm aware that projects are very long, but I did my best. Thank you, Anita.